Chapter Chapter 41. Giles watched the frozen fields speed past through the windows of the train. The sun was coming up, and deep red splash across the horizon, cracking daybreak like a golden egg across the landscape. Robert was sleeping opposite him, and Giles took the opportunity to study him. They had been lovers for a while last year, but Giles had found Robert to be very intense and rather negative in his approach to the relationship. Giles had tried to talk to him and get to know what he was like underneath the rather cold and brutal exterior, but did not get very far. Certainly, Robert had secrets and held them very close to his chest. They had decided to part, and Giles did not see Robert again for months until he turned up at the theatre one morning and basically asked for a job. Giles felt guilty enough to agree, and thus began Robert's new career as assistant director. Giles had regretted his decision almost immediately, as it was obvious that Roberts did not have the intuition or natural instincts that make a good director. He was also difficult with the actors, who did not respond favourably to his patronising and often plain rude remarks. Since their confrontation in his office last week, Giles had done some serious thinking. He knew just how serious the situation would be if Teddy had discovered his son was gay. The repercussion would spread across his own life as much as the Graham's family. Over the past months, Giles had fallen deeply in love with Teddy Graham, and so and, and as so often happens when one is blinded by emotion, he had hidden his head in the sand as to where they were going with their relationship. Giles could not think beyond the now. He just wanted things to stay the same forever. Robert had brought him up short with a jolt. Not only was his personal life threatened, but his professional life too was in jeopardy. So here he was on his way to sign a contract with one of the biggest producers in the West End for a 3 month run of his production of Hamlet. Robert would also get credit as the assistant director and work with him on the production. Teddy would remain in blissful ignorance of his son and his sexual proclivities, and Giles could enjoy his lover's attentions indefinitely. Robert coughed and stirred. "Oh, sorry, I must have dropped off. What time is it?" he asked. "Not a problem. We have 2 hours to go yet. Go back to sleep, dear boy. I have a headache, as a matter of fact. I think I will go and see if I can get an aspirin." Robert rose and started for the buffet car. "Do you want a coffee or anything?" he asked. "Lovely idea, yes, please, and a ham and cheese roll would be even more perfect." Giles grinned. "A secret treat of mine. Coming up," said Robert, and set off in search of supplies. He returned later with the coffees and 2 rolls, and as he sat down, he grimaced. "Something the matter?" asked Giles, taking his roll greedily and wrapping it. "I think I must be getting the flu or something. I ached all over, and I have got terrible mouth ulcers. I'm going to see my doctor on the way back to the station this afternoon, as a matter of fact. See if he can give me something to stave off the worst of the symptoms." They lapsed into silence as they ate their breakfast, and shortly after that Robert was asleep again. Giles continued to watch the world go by until he also dropped off. Both men were awoken at the same time as the train hooted its arrival into Euston. They took a cab to the Charing Cross Road to Wyndham's Theatre, which also housed the office of their producer. Robert was still struggling to feel better, and Giles suggested to go straight to his doctor. "Listen, it is not as though you really need to be here with me," he pointed out. "You have seen the contract and you know the contents. I'm not going to have you written out at the last minute or anything." Giles laughed tightly. "Can't afford to do that, can I?" Robert nodded. "Very well, then I'll accept your suggestion and go now, and then meet you at the station this afternoon at 4:15 at the barrier." "Absolutely. See you then," acknowledged Giles, and strode off towards the theatre. Robert hailed a cab. "St. Thomas Hospital." "Right you are, Gov." The taxi driver looked in his mirror and decided that this was not a passenger who wanted to chat, so he put his foot down and kept his mouth shut. Robert sat back in the cab and tried to stop the thoughts from swirling round in his head. It was always like this when he went to the hospital for tests. Nothing could stop the rot. He knew that. Would the doctors be able to tell him how long he had? He decided to go to the Terrace Higgins Trust after the hospital. This was basically an advice centre set up in July by the partner of a name called Terence Higgins, who had died of this disease. No one really knew what caused it or how to cure it. The doctors could only monitor patients like himself and struggled to find a solution, but Robert knew he was getting worse. Soon he must take himself away somewhere to die. The counsellor had told him last time that he must tell all the men he had sex with what was going on, but he just couldn't do it, and yet he had to tell Giles for Christ's sake. Now there was this stupid business with Lord Graham and his son. Robert had not intended to involve them in his campaign to make Giles employ him. It had been a spur-of-the-moment thing because he was angry. He had watched Giles and Lord Graham being feted at the Queen Hotel by George Delaware, and he had been jealous. After all, it was he who had introduced Giles to the hotel. Now he had been swept aside by titled gentlemen. Then he had seen Eddie at the hotel and they had got together one night. The boy was uncontrollable. Robert had given him a serious talk about protection and too much careless sex. But who was he to talk to? But who was he to talk? They had all partied together that night. It had been wild. None of these guys seemed to know anything about the disease that was stalking them. He had a couple of conversations with some friends about the symptoms, and yet there was nothing concrete to work from. Robert had never in the whole of his life felt so alone and abandoned. He would tell Giles tonight when they got back to crew, he decided, and if Giles was able to find any compassion for him, so be it. He was fucked anyway. Giles lifted the glass to his lips and savoured the moment. Another wonderful lunch with his colleague Mr. Langton, courtesy of the British Drama League. Here's to Hamlet, Prince of Denmark. May you be the Prince of Shaftesbury Avenue, announced James Langton, enjoying the toast. It is good to see you, Giles, and how delightful that I will be seeing my protege on Friday night at your theatre. Yes, it all turned out very well, Jenna, replied Giles. Sally had proved invaluable as a company member, and Jeremy is a splendid actor with a formidable career ahead, I think. But you had problems with your leading lady, I gather, asked James, who loved the gossip. She was on drugs, and all sorts, I hear. Well, I don't know about all that side of it, but as far as acting skills went, she was a non-starter. She had no idea about text or stagecraft. Los Angeles is welcome to her as far as I'm concerned. We are already inundated with suggestions for Ophelia for the production in town. I hope we can use some of the cast and crew as well, although it is always difficult with London producers as they want to be in control of everything. This wine is absolutely first class, James. Good choice. Now tell me your news. How is your wife? Giles meandered through lunch, getting pleasantly pissed, and arrived at the Barrier and Euston station in good time to meet Robert and get the train home. To his dismay, Robert never appeared, and he was forced to board the train alone. He was concerned at first, but shortly after Watford Junction he was lost to the world in an alcohol-fueled coma and did not wake until the guard announced the arrival at Crewe. Robert lay in his hospital bed staring at the ceiling. He had asked the nurse if she would be so kind as to call Crewe Theatre and explain that he could not be returning for some time due to ill health, and to ask Giles Longfellow to call him as soon as possible on the hospital number. So here he was waiting for death to come. The doctor had looked at the lesions which had appeared on his legs and taken more blood tests. I'm so sorry, but there's nothing we can do for you except keep you comfortable and in as little pain as possible. Do you have anyone you would like to contact in the meantime? Robert told him that all there was being Robert told them all that was being taken care of by the nurse, and said that hopefully his friend from Crewe would ring and would be able to make a visit. No, there was no family member he wished to inform. So now he was alone and acutely aware of his body. There's something about lying in the hospital bed with few distractions that encourages self-examination, and Robert could feel a tingling in his toes, and in his mind's eye he traced a route up his leg, past the lesions, which he had tried to ignore, up through his groin, which was aching, no longer with lust or love, just regret at what had been, across his stomach, which was churning with fear, up through his chest and heart, which was hurting with sadness and self-pity, up through his neck, which ached, and into his mouth, which was ulcerated and dry with panic. His brain was jam-packed with too many thoughts jostling for position. He tried to swallow and drew in a sharp breath of pain. Then the tears flowed, slowly at first, and then in a torment unstoppable like his demise. Did anyone care? Chapter 42. Sally spent the week in a dream. It flew by way too quickly for her. Every night she learned something new about a scene or an emotion, and every night she drew closer to Rupert. Her initial nerves about being naked under the dress were soon forgotten, but there had been one moment in the wings when Rupert had come up behind her and put his arms around her, and she could feel him hesitate as he became aware of her nakedness through the dress. Wow, he whispered in her ear, you feel amazing. I could stand here all evening and explore you. Sally shivered and moved away quickly, wrapping her cloak around her. It is so cold in these draughty old wings, she whispered back. I can think of better places to be in my bed, she thought, holding me, making love to me. All thoughts of Isabel expunged from your mind. On stage, she and Rupert were a good item and had created chemistry between them, even if it was not quite as charged as before. Friday night had been a scary evening when James Langdon arrived with agent from William Morris. The latter was a very charming urban man who pulled no punches. After the show, they met in the bar. Giles had arranged a light supper to be served and had gone to town with smoking salmon and oyster and champagne. Jeremy, Sally and Rupert were invited with Giles, James and Pete. Peter Stone as he introduced them. He was very laid back and looked just like Sally had imagined. A big London agent would, wearing a trendy, expensive suit, handmade shoes, silk shirt, and with distinguished grey hair and a slight Californian tan. A pleasure to meet you both, Sally and Rupert. And you are Jeremy, that's right. Letters. A very exciting and enlightened performance, if I may say so, young man. You have a future ahead of you. Would you like to do more with Shakespeare? Oh, absolutely, enthused Jeremy. I would love to get into the RSC and do a season at Stratford. That is my goal. He laughed nervously, wondering if he had gone too far, but Peter seemed to be genuinely interested. And you, Sally, what are you hoping to do after your season here? Sally found it more difficult to express her desires. She had been so sure when she left drama school that she would work her way up through rep to a play in the West End, or maybe join the company at the National. But since she had been watching Dora work the system here, and Hall talk about exposure on TV, she was not so sure where she belonged. Did she have enough talent, as Jeremy seemed to possess, to crack the big companies? She suddenly felt very shy and hesitated before she replied. She looked at them and round the table, waiting for her to speak. I'm not too sure, to be honest. In the last 3 months working here, so much has happened to me, and I probably need time to absorb everything I have experienced. I know I'm a good actress, but maybe not good enough. She looked around the table and smiled. Not exactly selling myself, am I? She said. Peter Stone answered her. No, you are not. But I like your honesty, and you have an understanding of yourself and the business which is intelligent and useful. Too many young actors just think their looks will see them through. There are many ways of getting a foot on the ladder, young lady, but many of those ladders lead to nowhere. If you're really serious about staying in the game, you have to want it more than life itself and accept that it is ultimately down to luck. You must have heard the cliche, right time, right place. But that is exactly what it boils down to in this game. Now, enough talk. Let's eat this delicious supper you have provided, Giles. Everyone relaxed, and the evening seemed to go well. Giles and James were an odd couple, and Sally wondered if they had ever had a relationship. But when she whispered her query to Jeremy, he giggled into his nap and replied, he would never come out of the closet, Sally. Do you remember when we were at the British Drama League? He went on and on about his wife, even though he was desperate to get into my knickers, I now realise. I'm so naive, sighed Sally. She watched Rupert talking to Peter Stone about films in the pipeline and casting opportunities, and could see how well he played the game. He was flirting with Giles and Jeremy, and at the same time being the serious young pretender to the throne. Everybody put on a face except her. Once supper was done, Sally was more than ready to leave, glad of the excuse of 2 shows tomorrow as it was Saturday and tomorrow night was her last performance. She thanked Giles for the lovely dinner and opportunity to see James again, made her farewell to Peter, who gave her his card and said, ring me and make an appointment when you are back in town and we can see what's on offer. Well, at least she had not been a complete failure. She gave Jeremy a big kiss and said goodbye. Thank God Giles had ordered her a taxi, and she was able to sit back on the short journey home and try to assess the night. She started to fall asleep and decided to leave it all for the morning. Too much to cope with now. She was relieved to find Dora in bed asleep, as she had wondered whether her sister would wake up and give her a grilling about the night. Needless to say, Dora had begged Sally to ask if she could come to the supper as well to meet Peter Stone, but Sally had refused point blank. You will just have to wait your turn. I'm sure it will come soon enough. Isn't that casting woman coming to watch you next week? She had asked. Well, yes, but that is not the same as a top London agent, is it? Dora sobbed. Anyway, I get the message. Sally woke up on Saturday. She got up and made a cup of tea, then sat in the kitchen trying to sort out her thoughts. She found the card Peter Stone had given her and turned it over and over in her hand. She would go and see him, she decided. As soon as she finished here, she needed an agent. That was for sure, because she was not capable of doing all the chat up stuff. Yet she just had a gut feeling that Peter Stone found her a little dull for the style of agency, and maybe Dora would be more to his liking. She got up to go and get ready, leaving the card on the table. When she arrived at the theatre, she found a large bunch of flowers at the stage door. Here, you must have a secret admirer, love, grinned Gladys. I can't find a note anywhere. It was accepted by everyone in the theatre that there was no secrets from her, at least not anything that could be pried open to divulge a name. Uh, it was all fair game to Our Lady of the Door. Oh wow, how lovely! I will have another look and let you know, said Sally with a wink. She also had several cards in her pigeonhole, which was a new experience for our budding actress. She loved opening them. They were all so different and always kind. She made sure she responded wherever there was an address and sent One of the little postcard-sized photos she had printed before she left home. It was her mother who had suggested she do that. "Oh, Mum, don't be daft," she had retorted. "Who's going to want a picture of me?" "Your fans, you stupid girl. You wait and see. They will be thronging round the stage door like bees to a honey pot." Well, that hadn't quite happened, but Patricia had been right about the fan letters, and Sally was very glad she had taken her mother's advice. The thought of her mother suddenly made her homesick. Unfortunately, her parents had not been able to come to this week as Dad could not get the time off from school, and Mum was nervous about coming up on her own. It was a big blow, but Sally had stuffed her disappointment to the back of her mind and got on with the job. There would be other times. In fact, it now looked like they would catch up would come up to watch the Christmas show, Wind in the Willows, because both Sally and Dora had lovely parts. Sally had been cast as the water rat, and Dora was the goalless sexy daughter. So the plan was for the parents to come to the last show on Christmas Eve, which finished early, so they could drive home and be back for midnight mass, followed by champagne and hot mince pies, then a bit of sleeping before indulging a perfect family Christmas day. Jeremy was going to pick them up on the motorway somewhere very early on Boxing Day morning so that they would be back for the 2 o'clock matinee. God forbid anything went wrong, as most of the leading plays would be in the car. Short and sweet through the holiday might be, it was worth every wink of sleep lost to Sally, who could not conceive of Christmas anywhere else on earth. She was also secretly hoping that she might be able to see Mac. He had rung her to wish her luck, explaining that he would be away until Christmas, but would make sure they met at some point during the holiday. Her Christmas reverie was interrupted by Jeremy, who was in early as usual. "Good night. Good night last night, wasn't it?" he said. "That Peter Stone seems to have a finger on the pulse, and guess what? Giles has invited me and Eddie to have dinner with him tonight in Manchester, so I'll be off for another night of debauchery." "Not with Giles, surely?" asked Sally. Wouldn't let himself be that very vulnerable to a cast member, would he? "Well, he already has to. He already has to be a certain extent, because we have seen him several times in the club with his lordship and Robert." He stopped short. "Oops, I have just committed a huge boo-boo. Sally, you must swear in your life not to tell anyone. Please swear. It is the best kept secret in the gay world that Lord Graham and Giles Longfellow are a couple." Sally was completely dumbstruck. "I can't believe it," she whispered. "But what about his wife, Tanya, and his daughter? And what about Eddie? Oh my God, Jeremy, does his father know his son is gay? What happened to the Graham line if Eddie is the only son and heir? Difficult to continue if you're gay." It was something that Jeremy and Eddie tried not to think about too often. "Will he get married and have an heir and spare like his father has done, do you think?" she continued. The complications were growing by the minute. "Would he have to give you up for the time being?" Jeremy sighed and ran his fingers through his hair. "I just don't know, Sal. It is my worst nightmare. Let's face it, the aristocracy have their own rules. It is a bit like the mafia. They have the money and the power. Eddie may well be forced to make decisions against his will, and you can bet your bottom dollar I will be out of the picture." "So why do you think Giles wants to see you this weekend?" asked Sally. "Probably to warn me off. I don't know. Maybe he's going to talk to Lord Graham. Who can tell? It is a bit scary, I admit. And I haven't been able to get hold of Eddie since yesterday to see if he knows anything. In fact, I'm going to the pub now to use their telephone. Gladys does not need to know about this conversation. I'm hoping to catch Eddie at lunch. I'll see you later." He kissed her on the top of her head and left. What a tangle where we weave, thought Sally. She made her way to the wardrobe to search out Janie. They had decided to give a party tonight by way of saying goodbye to Rupert and well done to Sally. It was going to be hard for Sally, but she was prepared. Had been all along in a way. Through this week she had wondered if there was a smidgen of hope that she might be in with a chance, as ever since the moment in the wings when Rupert had put his arms around her, she had felt a fusion between them. Maybe tonight she would ply him with drink and seduce him. The problem was she would have to have a few drinks herself to find the courage. After the show tonight, Peter and the boys planned to go back to her flat and get everything ready for the party. Sally had made a big shepherd's pie, and there was a lot of nibbles, and they all had clubbed to get together for the booze. But the champagne that Sally had bought was going to be the surprise. Janine had also hinted that she had a surprise too, so it was going to be fun. The matinee was full of school children, which was always hard work because they would chatter all the way through the play and whip and holler at any suggested sexual innuendo. Sometimes the actors just longed to go to the front of the stage and yell "shut up," but this company had mostly been very good about their behaviour, although the skeleton of Yorick was sometimes written on and displayed to the rest of the cast on stage by Rupert turning his back on the audience. The first time he did it, Pete and Simon giggled so much that both jumped into the grave and stayed there until they could control themselves. The ghost, while waiting in the ring, one day had decided to lift his gown and flash his parts at Charmaine, who was just about to go on stage. She was so shocked she practically leapt 10 feet in the air and landed with a bump on the stage. There had been strict instructions from Giles that there was to be no dirty tricks on the last night, as it was very unprofessional and the audience tonight had paid their money like everyone else and deserved a good show. Well, we will see, thought Sally nervously. Sally spent the time between the shows packing up. She would be out of the dressing room and back up with the girls next week. She wondered if Dora would be here, as she was headlining in the music hall. They were certainly chasing each other. Maybe they would share a dressing room for Wind in the Willows, although the role of the rat was considerably bigger than the washerman's daughter, so it would seem fair. Sally got the dressing room to herself. Oh, stop it, you silly cow. You are turning into a right old diva. This is crew repertoire theatre, not the Haymarket. Beginners Act 1, please, came the call. Everybody involved in the play came down to the stage and had a group photo. It was such a lovely moment, and the kind of thing that only happened in a theatre, real company spirit. Sally went to her usual corner to catch the beginning of the play, and Rupert came to give her his customary hug. You feel better than ever tonight, Miss Thomas. The vibes are positively jumping. He kissed her ear, and Sally had to hold herself together so as not to melt in his arms. It must be all the adrenaline coursing through her body that created this essential thrill. Use it well, Sally, and make it work for you on stage. She turned around and embraced Rupert, clinging to him so he would remember her through the thin silk dress. Good luck. It has been an amazing experience for me. I will never forget this moment. She kissed him gently on the lips and then pulled away. Off you go. The curtain is rising. The performance went like clockwork. Everybody upped their game. The only mishap was that, having never injured each other in the dueling scene, Rupert nicked Jeremy on the neck. There was real blood, although it looked very dramatic from the wings. Poor Heather was trying to get first aid organised and stay in the book. Disaster was averted as Jeremy pulled a silk hanky from his pocket and used it to good effect to stop the blood. Thank God for the hanky. Later that night, Artosa proposed to the indomitable Gwendolyn, who had a policy boys secreting hankies on her actors for just emergencies. As soon as the curtains came down, the boys were off to set up the shindig. The crew were in already, tearing down the walls of Elsinore. It was an easy get out tonight, as there was no real set to erect for the Victorian Music Hall, so they had high hopes of making the party before all the food and drink had gone, which is what usually happens, though Sally and Janine had made a pact to hold on some back for the workers. It took Sally a bit longer than usual tonight to get ready. She had a shower and reapplied her makeup because she wanted to look her best. She had saved a new dress for tonight and even managed to hide it from Dora. It was a little low at the front, and Sally was not sure about flashing her cleavage, but it was now or never. She waited for Janine and Gwendolyn to finish putting the washing in, so they could walk up to the hill together. Where's Geoffrey? Isn't he going to escort us ladies then? Inquired Sally as she appeared at the door. Gwendolyn manager Simon replied, he has escorted his opposite number, the Queen of Denmark, to the party. Felt he couldn't leave her to walk down on her own. So come on, girls, let's give it all we've got. Thanks for listening.